Good afternoon to everyone, and thanks for coming here today. I want to thank my colleagues, first of all, because they decided to utilize this title at the end of GCC. Obviously, I'm from Italy, so they wanted to have a bit of drama on the things, and that's why they decided on this title. I also thank the guy who came with the T-shirt of Cinque Terre, which is a beautiful place in Italy. Anyway. Okay, so today we are going to talk about GCC. The idea is to speak for probably half an hour. We'll talk about how GCC started, a brief of history in the last 15 years, what happened in the last few months, and the outlook and how things might change in the coming months and coming years. So the discussion to start the GCC, to create the GCC started in the 70s, and at that time Iran and Iraq were involved in the discussion, but the Iranian revolution in 1979 changed the plan. So in 1981 the GCC was created, but Iran and Iraq were not part of the GCC. The economy was declared the priority for the Union, but security was the main factor that kept the GCC members united until recently. And as an example, the Iran-Iraq war in the 80s was exactly, a security threat for the GCC. Indeed, in 1984, the GCC also created a Peninsula Shield Force, which is an army of 10,000 soldiers to protect the GCC member for any threat in the region. This army was never used. It was used only in 2011 when the troops, mainly from Saudi with the support of Emirates, entered Bahrain to support King Khalifa to stop the domestic uprising that at that time was a big issue for the king in Bahrain. So we said that the economy was declared the priority. In reality, security was the factor to keep them united. And at the economic level, not much happened since the GCC was created. It took decades to negotiate a customs union, which was implemented only in 2015, July 2015. A currency union has not been created, even though the currencies are pegged to the US dollar, with not the Kuwaiti dinar, which is pegged to a basket of currencies. There's still limited infrastructure to connect the GCC countries, and now with the ban, you cannot even easily travel among the GCC. The VAT should be implemented in 2018 in all GCC, but let's see if it's going to happen or not. And trade among all the members is still low, and obviously with the recent problems in the region is also going down. The interesting thing at the on the economic side is that the members, they have similar economic models. How does it work at typical GCC state? You have the oil and gas revenues, which are used to pay the state budget, and they are invested in the infrastructure projects. The infrastructure projects serve, both to improve the business environment, to enhance the quality of life of the citizen, and number three, they are also a tool to redistribute the wealth among the citizen. So we said revenues come in, you pay the state budget, you invest in infrastructure. What is left, it goes to the central bank and to the sovereign fund. The idea is to use the money that you accumulate to absorb macroeconomic shocks like oil price going down, and to invest in assets that in the future might give you good returns for the future generations. The limit of this model, and you can see it in the last 2 years, is the fact that you are exposed to the volatility of the price of oil and gas. So that's a brief of introduction on how the GCC were created. If you look at the history in the last 20 years, that's where massive changes started. The Americans invaded Afghanistan in 2001 and Iraq in 2003. A decade later, what they realized? They realized three things. Number one, they were overstretched. Number two, that too many resources were committed without significant gains. And number three, there were other threats that were becoming more pressing. For example, the rise of China. Both Russia and China could expand the project power because the Americans were highly involved and bogged down in the Middle East. So the result was that the Americans decided to change a strategy, and they said, okay, we move from active involvement to what they call balance of power. What does it mean? It means that there's no need to commit many resources and energies to stabilize the region, but the regional powers need to be more involved and take care directly of their problems. So the Americans, they need to maintain a relationship with each country in the region in order to reach this balance. The aim is that no single power will emerge so dominant that can threaten the American interests in the region and beyond. So how do you implement this strategy? The first step was to withdraw the forces from Iraq. This started in 2010 and was completed in 2011. And then they started the negotiation with Iran, and the final agreement was signed in July 2015. So when the Americans left Iraq, they created a vacuum of power that Iran filled. So you had this arc of sphere of influence that was going from Tehran to Beirut. Obviously, Iran, Iraq are under the Iranian influence. Syria, with Bashar al-Assad very close to the Iranian government, and Hezbollah in Lebanon. So the problem is that for the Sunni powers in the region, this was too much. They couldn't accept that Iran had so much power in the region, and then even the sanctions lifted. Even though not much has happened at the business level in Iran, lifting the sanctions has helped in two ways. Number one, now they can sit with many parts and they are gaining more and more international reputation. And number two, there are a lot of revenues that are entering, a lot of cash that is entering into the country through the sale of oil. So these were the two main actions that the Americans took: withdraw from Iraq, sign an agreement with Iran, which obviously was the historical enemy of the Sunni powers. At the same time, in December 2010, what happened? A street vendor in Tunisia set himself on fire. He was protesting against the government. So the protest gathered momentum, and Ben Ali, the former president, he has been there since 1987, had to flee the country on January 2011. He went to Saudi Arabia. So eventually these protests moved to Egypt, Libya, Syria, Iraq, Bahrain, Yemen. What is interesting is that only a few weeks later, it was 6 January 2011, the guy was setting on fire only 1 month before. Foreign Policy magazine used for the first time the word Arab Spring. Then the civil wars started in Libya, Syria, Iraq, Yemen. So these protests eventually became civil wars, and they've not ended yet. In this vacuum of power, especially in the region between Syria and Iraq, Islamist groups like Daesh were very capable to fill the gap, grow, conquer, and hold the territory. In Egypt, Mubarak lost the power, And in Bahrain, as we have said before, King Khalifa was extremely under pressure and managed to maintain the power only because Saudi Emirates intervened military there. So what's the result of all these activities is that we still have borders, we still talk about borders, but in reality these are countries that don't exist as before. Libya is no longer a country, Yemen has fragmented, you have different groups holding different parts of the country. You have the old government of Hadi supported by the Saudis, the Houthis supported by the Iranians, other Islamist groups. In Syria, again, you have different segments. You have the Bashar al-Assad regime, which is regaining territory with the help of the Iranians and the Russians, but they're still part of the country controlled by the Kurds, by Daesh and other Sunni rebels. Iraq, again, still fragmented and divided. So this is the result of the civil wars in these places, but other countries that didn't have civil wars, they are still in a very difficult position. You have Lebanon, which is divided and deadlocked. Egypt had massive economic problems, now is recovering. They managed to get funds from the IMF, the European Union, Saudi Arabia and Emirates. The government also implements some economic reforms, but the economy, while it's improved, is still suffering. And then they still have security issues in Sinai. Interesting, 2-3 days ago, there was also an attack of the Egyptian embassy in Myanmar. Jordan, which seems stable, and this mainly because the US, Israel, and Saudi Arabia supported the security services there, but they received 100,000 of refugees from Syria, and these people, they need to be integrated into the country. So again, it creates instability. So in this context, who are the regional powers who are competing for the influence? Since the region is so fluid, you have the Americans who are disengaging, who is moving to take the power and control and influence. You have Iran, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. Iran needs to deal with Turkey, with Daesh, with the Sunni Arabs, the Kurds, and an economy that, even though part of the relief or part of the sanctions have been lifted, is still suffering extremely very inefficient. Why they do that? They do mainly for two reasons. They need to reestablish and consolidate the arc of influence from Lebanon to Afghanistan. And number two, they want to prevent the Sunni powers to project power and threat Iran directly, and that's very true for Iraq. Israel is probably the country in the best position because all the enemies are fighting amongst each other. The main security threat for Israel is Hezbollah, because by fighting in Syria for many years, they became very trained. They got access to arms, weapons, and so on. And now that the fight in Syria is becoming less important for Hezbollah, they can retreat to Hezbollah. Hence, the security threat for Israel is becoming higher and higher. Then you have Turkey, which is concerned about the fragmentation in the south border, the rise of Iran, the Kurds, and the Russian involvement in the region. But at the same time, it represents an opportunity for Turkey to regain influence in areas that were part of the Ottoman Empire. And then you have Saudi Arabia, which needs to deal with many problems at the same time. The economy that is going down because of the low oil prices. You have the new generation that is coming to take the power with Mohammed bin Salman, who become the new king. They have the rise of Turkey, they have the rise of Iran, internal security issues, so a lot of problems at the same time with whom Saudi Arabia needs to deal with. So these are the powers in the region. So what's the GCC position in this context? we have, as we said, the Americans that are retreating. The main problem is that, the historical security guarantor of the region is US. And that's also very true for the GCC countries. So you see the Americans that historically were providing security that are less and less engaged in the region. You have your security guarantor, which signs a deal with the historical enemy, like Iran. You have Islamist groups such as Daesh that are rising. You have civil wars. So it's a very difficult, and low oil prices, so less economic power. So that's very difficult context for them. And that's why, so far, these threats have kept the GCC members united. But there are differences among them. For example, in the economy, they all have competing diversification strategy for their economies. If you see Kuwait, what they do, they support the downstream petrochemical production. And this every country does. Qatar, Saudi, Bahrain, sorry, Bahrain no, but Saudi and Oman, everyone is supporting the downstream petrochemical production. In Kuwait, they also supported the retail. Qatar, they supported the retail, the tourism, the sport, the airline. The Emirates, financial services, logistics, tourism, retail, and airline. Bahrain, it's mainly for financial services. Saudi Arabia, it's mainly for the downstream petrochemical. Oman, it's also for tourism, for logistics, like the building of the city of Duqm, and small and medium enterprises. So at the economic level, we have competing diversification strategy. At the social level, if you look at the people, they share similarities, culture, religion, language, roots. You have the families that are very much integrated. You might have a Qatari citizen married with Emirates, part of the family in Saudi Arabia, and so on. So the families are very integrated. But in the last few years, what the governments of the region have done was to instill and inspire all nationalistic sentiments. Even the national days, it's a recent invention. Politically, they have different policy visions. We have Qatar, and we'll go back to Qatar deeper later. They have a very close and deep relationship with Turkey, and they both support Islamist groups in the region. Islamist groups that have a very ideology very close to the Muslim Brotherhood. Kuwait has roughly 30-40% Shia minority, so they need to balance among the Sunni and the Shia, and they also need to maintain a balanced foreign policy because of this reason. Oman, who tends to be independent, but they don't mind, to send the troops in support of the Saudi coalition in Yemen and deal with Iran. We have Emirates who decided since the Arab Spring to have zero tolerance against political Islam. They are very active in Palestine, in Libya, in many theaters. They also participated in the war in Yemen together with Saudi Arabia, even though recently they decided to limit their involvement. And they started to build military bases in East Africa, in places like Eritrea and Somalia. Bahrain, you have a Sunni minority dominating a Shia majority, so the king, who is Sunni, needs the political, military, and economic support from Saudi and Emirates in order to maintain the power. And Saudi and Emirates are very happy to do that, because otherwise Iran will influence and control the country. And Saudi, as we have said before, they have many problems to deal at the same time, but they're also the largest economy and the country with the largest population among the GCC, but they're also aware of their limits, so they know very well that in order to counter the common threats, the only way is to create a coalition of Sunni countries that keep this coalition together. They don't mind to spend billions in order to achieve this goal. So we have differences in terms of economy, social, political. Where you have commonalities is at the security level. Security level because they all need external security guarantor for their countries. Why? Because they don't have manpower. At the end, they're a small country. And in general, the external security guarantor is the US, as we have seen here before. And when they want to project power, they always rely on proxy groups. What's the limit of this model? The limit of this model is that, number one, you need to have money to pay, and number two, that money not always buy loyalty. So these groups might change. While their main enemy, Iran, created the Quds, and this is an Iranian force, and they have direct control on the ground on what happens. So in the last, we are seeing that there are some differences, and in the last few months, these differences reached a peak. And this was reached on the 5th of June, when Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt, the quartet, decided to cut their relations with Qatar. They decided to withdraw their ambassador and impose a travel and trade ban. Yeah, the move was sudden, but somehow the situation started to escalate a few weeks before. You could see some events that happened and prepared the June 5th ban. In May, the US president came to visit Saudi Arabia. Qatar news agency was hacked, attributing statements to the Emir of Qatar and his Minister of Foreign Affairs in favor of Iran and Israel. The Saudi al-Sheikh family, together with the Saudi Minister of Islamic Affairs and two other prominent Saudis, requested to change the name of the main mosque in Doha, which is called the Imam Abdul Wahab Mosque, arguing that Sheikh Ahmad bin Khalifa, the former emir, wrongly called himself a descendant of the Imam. Moody also downgraded Qatar. So the effect on Qatar of these travel and trade bans are in three main areas: trade disruption, the confidence that has been lowered, and tighter financial condition for the country. We can go back this one if someone has more questions to discuss more. There is also another interesting consequence that the war has moved to the media level. So the regional and global media have become the preferred weapons in this dispute. Why? Because it helps to sustain this domestic support and to compete against support from shared allies in Europe and US. Moreover, Saudi Emirates, the quartet, has also an interest in countering the influence of Al Jazeera in the Middle East, which has not been shy in providing critical coverage of Qatar neighbors across the Middle East in the last 20 years since it was created. So, what are the reasons behind these disputes? Qatar, in the last 2 decades, has been able to develop policies independently from the rest of the GCC. This is because Qatar has a small population, small minorities, centralized state that allows to avoid any ethno-religious tension affecting some of the neighboring countries, Bahrain, Kuwait, and so on, for example, or even Saudi with the Shia minority in the east. And also, Qatar has massive gas reserves that give the country the financial strength and the ability to project power. Qatar is the only gas player in the region because all the neighbors export mainly oil. So you have a lot of money coming in, you are the only one who has the gas, so you have this freedom of action. You have internal control, so that's how you can project power. So what's the view of Qatar? They see an Islamization rising, they see the rise of Turkey, so what they decided to do? They decided to support Islamist groups in the region and to have a pragmatic relationship even with Iran. The reason is because the biggest gas reserve one of the biggest gas reserves in the world is between Qatar and Iran. So that's what they have done. But on the other side, Saudi Arabia and Emirates, and actually it's more Emirates who is behind everything, they cannot tolerate political Islam, because political Islam, Muslim brothers, they have this governance model which propose a sort of Islamic republic. And if you are a king or sultan, obviously you don't want to have a republic. And they cannot tolerate the rise of Iran. So these are the main differences in the policies and the visions among these countries. So the other question is why this happened now? Because Qatar didn't do anything that was out of ordinary or suddenly provoke this situation. In reality, in the past, there were already some attempts to pressure Doha, but they failed. For example, in 2014, Saudi, Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt already asked their ambassadors to come back home. So the previous attempts failed. Then they felt support in the current US administration. So they thought, okay, we have this window, which probably is not going to last for a long time. So we need to act very fast and very strong. And that's what they've done. So for them, the only solution left in order to ban the Doha was to escalate all the situation. But Doha, at the end, managed to react, and what the Saudi and Emirates were expecting, a change in leadership and so on, did not happen. So what are the geopolitical consequences now in the region? Let's look at the US, Qatar, and the quartet position. The US position, they try to push for a solution to the Gulf crisis because they don't want a breakup of GCC, and they don't want Qatar to be too close to Iran. But the US are extremely busy with North Korea, so they don't have a strong interest in pushing for a fast resolution. For Qatar has managed really well and managed to, even though the costs have been very, very high, but they managed to react, and they show high resilience. And these can convince some Qatari officials that survival for the country is possible, even outside the GCC. With some support from US, some support from Europe, together with some regional help from Turkey and Iran, can lead to survival in the long term. But the main risk of this strategy is the uncertainty on the will of US to protect Qatar in the long term, because Turkey and Iran, they can only provide limited security. And both Turkey and Iran are competing for influence in the region. So for Turkey and Iran, the current dispute, it's an amazing opportunity to gain more power in the Gulf. The consequence that, if Qatar moves too close in particular to Iran, the equilibrium might be unstable, because in the end, the only country that can provide security is the US. So what's the position of the quartet? They can accept Doha retaining its political Islam, Muslim brother ideology in Qatar, but they will not accept Doha to spread and support groups in other places. And you can see it in these days, for example, in Palestine, where the Emirates, they are trying to support Dahan and trying to squeeze Hamas. At the same time, a stronger relationship with Iran, it's also unacceptable. So you see now the quartet that is emerging as an Arab bloc to limit the Turkish and Iranian influence in the region. This is happening because the Emirates understood very well in advance the changes that the disengagement of the US in the Middle East and the spread of political Islam would bring. So they stepped in order to keep the order in the region and to show the Americans that they could do that. How they did it? They did it by forging a very good and strong relationship with Saudi Arabia, and by being more active, involved in theaters in places like Libya, Palestine, and Yemen. The ironic thing is that you have this Arab bloc, which now finds itself very close aligned with the interests of Israel, which at the same time they don't want an Iran too powerful, and they don't want political Islam to spread, especially in Palestine. So what's the outlook for the GCC if this is the context? So we say that so far Doha has been very successful in managing the financial, economic, and logistic problems that the sanctions have created. And not only that, but they also manage very well the public relation campaign. Qatar has definitely improved its position and generated international sympathy, and also exposed some Saudi Emirates action through the leaks in the news. We'll say that the media have become the best weapons in these wars. However, these successes can fade if Doha does not secure strong security guarantees, which at the moment can only be provided by the US. So the next GCC meeting will be in December in Kuwait. The Emir of Kuwait is a strong supporter of the integrity of GCC, but if some progress is not achieved in these weeks preceding the meeting, hawks would question the attendance and participation of Qatar in the GCC. And these could also lead to additional sanctions against Doha. But additional sanctions would also hit the Gulf economies, because additional limitation on the trades affect both Qatar and the neighbor countries. So what we see is that we started by saying that the GCC was created as a counter to Iran, and now the rise of Iran is contributing to call into question the integrity of the GCC. And the situation now, if it's prolonged in the long term, it will be more and more difficult to go back to the previous situation. And in any case, even if the ties are restored among the Gulf countries, this escalation of events has created wounds that are difficult to heal in the short, medium term. So you will see now these blocks that are emerging with Qatar, Oman, Saudi Emirates. So we are moving towards a consensus that was common in the previous years among the GCC, to a model where you have more bilateral relationships. Thank you very much.
Do you think the rising Iranian influence in the region will cause the Arab states to cozy up to Israel?
Will cause, sorry?
To get closer to Israel.
Yes, and that's what is happening. That's what I was saying before, especially in the case of Saudi and Emirates. So you have these new blocks that are emerging, and you can see how the interests of Saudi and Emirates are aligning with with Israel, because they both fear the rise of Iran for different reasons. And you can see that they start to work at the tactical level, and you can see it in Palestine, where they're trying to engineer a change in the government. You will have Dahlan, who comes from Al-Fatah. They want to put him in Gaza. So the Emirates and the Saudis are putting a lot of money in Gaza, trying to support Dahlan. And in exchange, Israel will release some pressure on Gaza. But the security most likely will be provided by Hamas. So that's the sort of engineering they are putting together. So somehow it's a loss for Hamas because they lose power. It's a loss for Mohammed Abbas, and it's a gain for Dahlan. It's also a loss for Qatar because they supported Hamas. But that's the new relationships that are growing in the region.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. So you mentioned a lot about United States, the part that they play. So now what we can see is that China is a rising power. So did China actually play a role in the GCC, and how are they influencing that part of the region? Could you explain more about that?
Yes. Okay. China is very active here in Asia because obviously it's closer. They have more interest here, and it's easier for them. Middle East is number one, is more difficult to understand. It's very far, and it's difficult to control the influence, especially in this moment of where events are so fluid and might change very, very fast. So what China is trying to do is to secure the oil that they buy from Saudi and Iran. They also did some drills, military drills, a couple months ago with Iran. It was a small thing. But in any case, they want to maintain a good relationship with both countries because they buy oil from them. And then they will continue to make deals for their construction and other companies. But from a security point of view, they are not active. They use Russia to do that.
Thank you, Mattia, for that presentation. From the presentation and from earlier paper you put out last week, it seems as if you are saying that Qatar has done quite well so far. It's still surviving, and it's not capitulating to the demands of its neighbors. But can you explain to us what is going on in the minds of the Qataris? Why did they even get to this position where the GCC has broken its consensus building culture, and they're being punished by the group which they're supposed to be closest to? And there's a big lively debate in Singapore about what's happened in Qatar and how Singapore should learn from it.
Yeah.
Could you tell us what you think about this?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The main problem is that the Americans are less engaged in the region. That's the problem number one. And if you're in Asia, that's why you're concerned, because the Americans also want to disengage from Asia. How they're going to do, that's the big questions. And if you look at the Middle East, what happened, you don't feel you feel very concerned. So both Qatar and Emirates, they have competing economies, competing foreign policies, and so on. So that's why you have these issues and these problems. On top of that, you have young guys with a strong ego, and these might accelerate what was already there in any case. And there was no other option for the Emirates. You see some support in the current US administration. So you have this window of opportunity, and you need to act, and you need to act fast because you don't know for how long it can last. Qatar was expecting something, but not at this intensity. So at this point, they don't have other option. But they already have a very strong relationship with Turkey. They built a relationship with many countries in the last 20 years, thanks to the oil and gas sales. So basically, they leverage the relationships they had in order to continue and to survive. Iran, you can like it or not, but if you cannot use the sea space and the air space, the only one that is available for you is going through Iran, you don't have too many options. So they like the relationship with Turkey, they don't trust Iran, but somehow you need them. There was even an agreement that was signed, Qatar, Iran and Turkey, where you have a new shipping route where the goods move via sea between Qatar and Iran and then via land to Turkey. That's the only way for them. And the Iranians are taking advantage of that. Each Qatar Airways plane that goes through the Iranian airspace has to pay $2,000. You can calculate how many Qatar Airways you have every day, and you can see how much money the Iranians are making. So for them, it's a big opportunity. You can make money, more business, and more relevance in the region. And if you are Iran, you are happy to see your enemy, the GCC, divided and broken. From Emirate point of view, they are the ones very much behind everything. You see the Saudi that are in very difficult position. You see Qatar that is your competitor, so what do? You ally with Saudi because you know they're in a difficult position, they might go down in order to destroy your competitor. Makes sense, no? As a strategy. And you just need to wait. I don't know if I'm clear or...
Hi, thank you for your lecture. I'm here.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm interested to know your views on this region from an environmental point of view. I mean, we've observed there's a wave of change. The world is coming around to the idea that reliance on fossil fuels is not sustainable, and nations are coming together to fight the reliance on the reliance of fossil fuels. Do you think that this necessarily is preparing this region for more unrest as their business runs out? And if that is the case, do you think the GCC or these countries will have any plans to thwart the world's attempts to become more environmentally friendly?
Okay, for sure we are moving. I mean, as you say, that we'll have more and more sources of energy. You can be solar, can be wind, but probably the biggest one will be gas. And what you see today, even in China, for example, moving from coal, which pollutes a lot, from coal to gas, from oil to gas. So if you are Qatar, you're very happy to see this change, obviously. For the others, it's more difficult. They are aware of that. You can try to delay, but it's something that is started. So that's why you should have an industrial base in your country, and you should have a sovereign funds. So these two tools, they should help you to maintain revenues even in the future when the oil, most likely we will start to use other energies, but we still have oil. It's not that we were going to run out of oil. We will still have oil, but we'll use other energy, other sources of energy. So the unrest, you already have it, but the reason of the unrest is not because of the oil, it's because when a big power retreats, someone wants to fill this vacuum. That's the reason of the unrest. In the case of Middle East, and to a certain extent even in Asia, you have an Islamization wave. You have it in Europe, you have a Middle East, and you have in Asia. So if you speak to Qatar, they will tell you, okay, we have this Islamization, so somehow we have to deal with them. And you think that the best groups we can have in power are political Islam, Muslim Brothers type of people. And we support them in their countries, but in my country, no, because I'm the emir. I want to be an emir. I don't want like a democracy, a republic, which makes sense, obviously. If you speak to the Emirates, they are very scared. They say, no, we don't want these people. We prefer to have people like Sisi or strong people in power who can destroy all these groups because we really fear these groups because one day they may come back and take the power. Just to give you information, in the 70s and the 80s, when the Gulf became independent from UK, they didn't have anything. So they were obliged to import teachers, and most of the teachers were coming from Egypt, and these were Muslim brothers. So these people, they came and they set all the system, and they created the ideas, the ideology, and so on. In Emirates, it's called Al-Islah, for example. You can call it Hamas, but anyway, let's call Muslim Brothers because it's easy. Then you have many differences, but that's the big umbrella. And they're very, very scared because they might fear I'm going to lose the control. They might take the power today because you have the Islamization rising. So they feel justified in what they do. So for the environment, it's becoming a real problem. Even in China, it's a political problem. And you cannot operate where the pollution is so high. So obviously what they do, they try to move, as we say, from coal to gas. The problem is that you always rely on sources that are far from you. And in case of China, you need to import, and you need to import via sea. Who control the sea? The Americans. And the Americans are your first enemy. So if you are Chinese, I mean, you can feel that you cannot be so quiet when you sleep in the night, You never know, because the Americans already imposed a blockade on Japan, and that was the trigger of World War II. I'm not saying that this will be the trigger of World War III, but if you are a state, you always need to prepare for the worst case scenario. So what you do, one belt, one road. So you try to find alternative shipping routes, like Qatar, You are forced to find alternative shipping routes. The problem is that, building one belt, one road, you don't go through Japan or Germany. You have to go through very unstable places. That's not easy. And places that, from a geographic point of view, you have mountains, bad climate, and so on. So it costs a lot. So where do you get the money to build these things? Problem number one. Problem number two, as you can see in the case of Sri Lanka and Gwadar in Pakistan, the local population might not be so happy if you come. They might like it or not. So it's not an easy situation. And then you have the problem in North Korea. The two main problems you have today here in Asia are the North Korea, and if you speak to the military, they will tell you we cannot attack because North Korea, all the artillery there, by the time we stop, we bomb, and we destroy everything, it takes days, if not weeks, which means that thousands of South Koreans will die. So we cannot attack. But in this moment where both countries are escalating and the Americans are putting a lot of pressure, even military, the risk of miscalculation is very, very high. And that's what can lead to a war. Not because they want to attack first, but they want to put pressure on you and make sure that you make mistakes. Even in the rhetoric, for example, when Trump called Kim, he's used missile man. You said you're a missile man. Yeah, exactly, sorry. Yeah, the rocket man. This is putting pressure on him, because he wants him to make a mistake. That's what he wants, So, and the other problem you have in Asia is the Islamization. Might be a security issue. That's the problem, because in places like Singapore, where the communities, they live all together. If you have an attack, then you might lose the harmony among the communities. And that's exactly what these groups want, And these groups are extremely good. And if you see what Daesh does and other Islamist groups, they're extremely good in understanding where the fault lines are and attacking there, divide the people. They're very good in that. So these, in my view, are the two main problems in the region. You can add even a number 3, which is the trade. So the trade policy of US, they want to have, let's call it, better deals with South Korea, China, and so on. So the reduction in trade might be another issue here in the region. But I would say North Korea and the risk of attacks, these are the two main security risks. I don't know if I answer or...
Sorry, just to clarify, so I hear three groups. Hello? Yeah, I hear three broad groups that throughout the thematically. You have Iran, the GCC, and then you have the proxy groups. And I'm wondering, and you mentioned about Daesh and groups like that being able to influence in this part of Asia. So does this mean that there is an ideological war that is being exported because of this competition within the Middle East? And if so, what is the extent of it?
Yeah, you can export, because Saudi, for example, I heard the number, I don't know if it's correct or not, but they funded charity organization, Islam movements for 100 billions, building schools, hospitals, and so I don't know if the number is correct, honestly. That's the number I heard. For sure, you push for an ideology. Yeah, the problem is that, if I have to ask my people to attack you, my people say, why should I attack him? I need to find an excuse. You might have a different color of the skin, might have a different religion. I need to find something. And without that, how can I convince the people to fight for me? Because if someone comes for me for money, yes, I might pay him $100. The next day, he finds someone who pays under 10, he goes with the other one. That's the risk. But if I go inside him, he's very loyal to me. So that's what you need. The problem, and you can see it in the case of Marawi or in case of Indonesia, for example, you use the ideology to basically enhance your criminal activities. Like in case of Indonesia, I've been told that Islamist groups are actually Sufi. And Sufi in general, they don't promote very extreme views. But what these groups do, they go to the shops and say, why do you sell alcohol? You should stop. And say, you should stop, but if you want to continue to sell, you have to pay me. So, they use the excuse of the religion to basically pursue criminal activities. In other cases, in case of Philippines, this was a pure ideological. There was money moved from Syria through Turkey to Philippines, 600,000 people say, and used, these people are ready to die, and they stay there for months fighting. Obviously, they become very relevant from a media point of view because for months you have people talking about you, and this helps, in becoming relevant as an organization and in the recruiting. So for sure there is an ideological component, but this ideological component, it goes very well and fits very well with all the criminal activities. Yeah, let's say for example you're North Korea. North Korea uses front companies in Malaysia. You are an organization, you are Daesh, another group in Syria, and you need to attack a country here in Asia. Why not buying arms from North Korea, who desperately needs money? So you might have a discount. So these are the problems here today. The ideology, for sure is very powerful because this buys the loyalty of the people. And that's the problem, what I was mentioning. If you are a Gulf state, in Qatar there are 2 million people, in Emirates, 5 million people, a small amount of people, so you don't have the manpower. If you want to project power and control the region, you need to engage proxy groups. You might try to find some affinity at the ideological level, but these are not your people. And again, today you might fight for me, tomorrow for you. You see, while Iran does not have this problem because the Kurds are Iranian soldiers. But again, if you're a small country, you cannot have 300 million people, So.
Okay, sorry, just to quickly clarify then. So what you're saying is that, what I understand is that you're saying that the proxy groups and the GCC states, they have a shared interest in influence in this area, and that comes in the form of destabilizing the area too.
Oh, okay, sorry. When I was talking about proxy groups, I was talking about what they do in the region.
Right.
Yeah. They don't use the proxy groups to destabilize the region here. Right. What they do, they might finance charity activities here, and they create relationships, ideology, and so on. The proxy groups, which you can use as ideology. If you're an organization, you can tap into this ideology and leverage that to convince the people to stay with you. When I was talking about proxy groups, I was talking about the wars in Libya, in Yemen.
Specific to that geography.
Yeah.
Right.
In that region. Yeah, sorry for that.
Yeah, that's fine. All right. Then the follow-up would be, so given that this is mostly the Sunni groups, do you foresee the Iranian side trying to also establish ideological footings in this area?
In this, yeah.
Yeah.
They also do
Have
that.
they done so?
Yeah. I was talking to an NGO in Cambodia, just to give you an idea. They come there, I mean, like in Malaysia, there are thousands of Iranians, just to give you an idea. In Cambodia, I was talking to this NGO, and the guy was telling me, yes, we start to see the first Shia here in Cambodia, which is very unusual, especially because for the region here, when you talk about Islam, in general, people link Islam to Sunni. They don't have this differentiation Sunni Shia. I mean, it's not that strong like Middle East. But in Cambodia, this guy was telling me, yes, we started to see Iranians coming, recruiting people, bringing them to Tehran, sending them to schools, and then they will go back to Cambodia. But when they come back to Cambodia after years in Iran, they are very Shia ready.
Okay, but there has been presence of Shiites in this region for
Yes.
centuries back prior.
Yeah.
to-
Because of the trade, there were
Right.
Arabs, Persians, and so on. But most of the Muslims here are Sunni,
Right. Okay.
most of them.
All right. Sure. Thank you.
I don't think my question is very related to your lecture, but I saw
It's
from
fine.
your website that you consult for Merrill Lynch for real estate. So I wanted to ask whether does the GCC and the impact on the Middle East, how does it impact the real estate markets there? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, the real estate market there. The best market to buy was Dubai, and still is Dubai because it's the more liquid market. In other places, like for example in Doha, there are certain areas where you can buy, other areas where you cannot buy. I lived in the Gulf for 9 years. If you ask me, I never bought. Reason is because you never know. You might buy a house, and one day someone might tell you, Mattia, you have problems, but this house actually belongs to another person. So what do? Or let's say, for example, something happens, you have to leave the country, and you have to sell the house. You have 1 week or 1 month to leave the country. You bought the house at 100. How much will be the price at which you will sell if the buyer knows that you have to leave the country in 4 weeks? So these are the problems. In general, as I said, the best market is Dubai. The reason is because things are changing a bit, but until recently, they said, you sell drugs, you come from any country in the world, as long as you put cash, like Switzerland, we don't mind. And that's why the prices of real estate went so high in Dubai. And there was so much liquidity, people keep on buying and selling. But apart from Dubai, I would not buy in other places unless you are local. I mean, it's very, very difficult. You are taking so much risk.
But has the government put in cooling measures to stop?
Yes. The government Dubai, yes. Yeah.
I mean, because in China as well, the government has tried to do such things, but it has been limited in its effectiveness. So
Yeah, okay, it's much easier to do it in Dubai than in China. China, 1.3 billion country, in Dubai you have a few million, so it's easier to control the market there. Yeah, most likely everyone there, in the market. In China, plus you have many big cities, so it's much more difficult to control because of the geography. In Dubai, yes, there were some cooling measures that they were adopted especially after the crisis of 2008 and so on. People were buying before it was built. It was like, I have a project to build this tower. You were coming and buy an apartment and then sell to another person, even before the tower was built. So it was too much. So these things can last, but not forever. The problem is when you are the last one. Then you are the guy who loses money. But if you are before, but again, it's a high speculative market, and again, it cannot last forever. And it can last until you have liquidity. It's not by coincidence that when the liquidity became very tight in the market in 2008 and 2009, no liquidity, so this circle stops, and then the prices collapse. Buy in Singapore, the prices are lower.
Thanks for your lecture, very interesting. My question is also not directly related to the lecture. Recently we have observed some improvement in women's rights in Saudi Arabia. Do you expect any conflict inside Saudi after such improvement?
Any conflict, sorry?
Conflict, some dispute, some...
You mean like in Saudi?
In Saudi, yeah, inside Saudi.
Okay, okay. Yeah, the problem in Saudi is that I think half of the population is less than 30 years old. So that's Saudi Arabia. So these people, somehow, they have different ideas of the others. And the leadership understood very well that. And that's why you have the new guy, Mohammed bin Salman, who is in his 30s. And this guy, you might like it or not, but he might use Snapchat, Instagram, like the average Saudi guy. His father is 8 years old, probably doesn't know what's Snapchat or Instagram or WhatsApp. So you need to put, because you have most of your population who has a certain needs. And that's why Mohammed bin Salman even goes on TV and tells you, okay, these are the problems, but I know how to fix them. Maybe it does not have any idea on how to fix the problem, but that's not relevant. The worst is to do like Theresa May, you have a fire in London, people die and say, sorry, I couldn't go because I was busy. Your role as a leader is to lead and guide your country. And that's what he does, even though maybe you doesn't know how to do it, but you have many advisors to assist you. So what's the problem of Saudi? You have a lot of younger population with obviously certain demands and certain needs, but at the same time it's a very conservative population. So how do you do that? Slowly. And that's the balance that you need to find. So it depends. So you have to change, but not too fast. Because otherwise, the other part of the population will be very upset and revolt against you. So that's your capabilities, your skills to understand when you can move. And he's starting slowly, He communicates on TV, he did a concert. So, slowly. And then now, the women who can drive. I mean, it will start in June 2018, because first you have to build driving schools. You ask me real estate, I would be driving schools in Saudi Arabia for women. You were asking for investments. There will be high demand, because the women now, they need to learn how to drive. So for sure that will be a big business. Yeah, the market is there. So that's the problem. You need to change, but not too fast. How to find this equilibrium? That's the difficult part. And if you're wrong, yes. It's like somehow like a Gorbachev. He understood that he had to open the country. He went too fast, he lost everything. Somehow. For the time being, yes. For the time being, yes. He slowly implements all the social, economic reforms. But it's a big change for them. It's a big change. Yeah, for them. Because if you ask to a Saudi man, now you can use this application today. Oh, I'm very happy. but even your sister will use it. Oh, no, my sister, no. So, you know, it's a very conservative society, and you cannot pretend. It's not that you're right or wrong. That's your culture, and you cannot change overnight what you have done for centuries.
Hey, thanks a lot for the lecture. I have two questions. First, I still can't see the substantial and strategical reason that Qatar supports brotherhood despite they lost their upper hand in Egyptian politics, which is the ideological capital of the movement. And second, what do you think about the Qatar-Turkey relationships and future of it? Do you think the depth of the relationship is deep enough to sustain in the future?
Okay. We have to distinguish You have an Islamization wave. In Turkey, Erdogan understood very well, and that's how he played. He became more and more conservative because he understood that the population was moving towards this direction. He probably went too fast, so now you have a society which is more polarized. You are Qatar, you're a small country, you are between two big powers, Saudi Arabia and Iran. Saudi Arabia, if they want, they can take your country in a few hours. Iran, they share with you the biggest gas reserve. Without gas, you die. So these are your main problems. How do you deal with that, you know? And your protection is guaranteed by the US. And you see the US that, for different reasons, they want to disengage from the regions, from Middle East, from Asia. They want to maintain, as we said, what they call balance of power, which means you have regional powers taking care directly of the problems of the region, and ideally no one becomes so dominant that can threaten their interests, which makes sense, because they want to commit less resources. So if this is the situation, the view of Qatar was, okay, I see Turkey rise, and if you ask me, that's also my view. I see Turkey as a dominant power in the region, and Japan in East Asia. By the way, since you were asking, the two rising power on the west and the east side of Asia, in my opinion, are Japan and Turkey. So Qatar said, okay, we have Turkey that is rising. They support political Islam. We have the Islamization, so it makes sense for us to be the relationship with them. Also because they might give us political security support, and we can give them the gas. And there's a lot of trade and business can be done between Qatar and Turkey. You're right, Egypt is a place where Muslim Brothers started and so on. When the Arab Spring started, Mubarak lost the power, Morsi came to the power. At that time, I was working for the Qatar Sovereign Fund. What we did, the Qatar government asked three entities. One was my entity, another one was Al Jazeera, and the other one was Qatar Gas. What happened? We were investing billions in the country. In which projects? Development projects, so building cities, infrastructure, and so on, because this helps the local economy. Al Jazeera was working on the media, and Qatar Gas was sending gas to support the energy needs of Egypt. So this was the strategy. Everyone was doing a piece. My boss was the Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs. I mean, he was having different hats. Was my chairman, Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and 300,000 other things. So he could decide on many things. And the problem is that it didn't work. It didn't work because Morsi didn't have support from Europe and US. Morsi was in need. There was already a liquidity problem in Egypt at that time. He was begging the IMF to get a loan. There was a technical delay in the loan. When Sisi took the power, the IMF released the money. So that's that's the context there. But Qatar didn't change the view, and they're supporting the same groups in Tunisia, in Palestine, and how they support through financial power. And that's what we're doing, investing in Tunisia, Palestine, Sudan, Eritrea, and so on. Because again, if you are a small and rich country, that's what you can do. You always work under constraints, so you don't have too many options. Am I clear, or? Yes.
Thank you very much. Very interesting and unexpected knowledge. I want to ask a question. Like, if you think mostly of Iranian people, they're not religious compared to, let's say, Saudi Arabia. So why is bad if Iran will be dominating in the region?
No, I didn't say that it's bad. No, for me, it's never good or bad. It's not bad. I'm saying if you're Sunni, I mean, yeah, the region has been always dominated by Turks, Arabs, and Persians. The first empire in the history was the Persian Empire. So if you are Sunni and you see your historical enemy rising, how do you react? For sure you're not happy. It's not good or bad from an ethical point of view. It's a big problem for your survival and your security.
Why?
Okay, let's assume that you're Saudi Arabia and you have a status quo. Okay, one step back. Countries where they are powerful, they always project power. A reason is because resources are scarce, so you need to control the resources before the others will do it. And the bigger you become, the more you want to control, because you are more and more on the things. You become an empire, even though you don't want to be an empire. Somehow, because you become bigger and bigger, then you're more involved on the things, and if you want to preserve your interests, you need to be more and more involved, even though if you don't want. I don't know if I'm clear. More or less. So if you have a status quo where your historical enemy, Iran, you're Saudi Arabia, your historical enemy, Iran, they are under sanctions, they have many problems. In Iraq, there is Hussein, their historical enemy, who already tried to attack them in the 80s, and so on. You're more or less comfortable, correct? The oil prices are high. But then suddenly, and your security is guaranteed by the Americans. So the guy who provides your security makes a deal with your enemy. That's not a good thing if you're in this position. Number one, if you remove Saddam Hussein, you let the Iranians to have an influence in a big area. And Iranians are your historical enemy. They always try to control the region, like the Arabs, like the Ottomans. Okay? So you have all these problems. They remove someone who was blocking them. And who removes that is the guy who is supposed to be your friend, because it's the guy who is providing you security, is your bodyguard. It's a difficult position. So how do you react? You react by supporting different proxy groups and trying to limit the power of your enemy. And you're also aware that alone you cannot do it. So that's why you need a coalition of different countries to be with you to counter them. But one of them, like Qatar, doesn't want to be with you. So you attack them. But the problem is that, that's not just Middle East. It's in Asia, in Europe, in US, everywhere, And that's why even China, why do they want South China Sea? You become more and more powerful, and somehow you have to defend your own space. It's like Ukraine for Russia. You are from East Europe, correct? Yeah. It's a buffer. Germans already tried to invade Russia from Ukraine. So if you remove this buffer, for sure Russia will be extremely insecure. For me, it's not good or bad. I mean, it depends if you are Ukrainian, Russia, Americans, and so on. But from a pure geopolitical point of view, if you remove a buffer, then that country will feel so insecure. It's like Russia taking Cuba. For sure the Americans will take, or Mexico. For sure the Americans, because then they can threaten you directly, you know. I'm next door. It's not a situation that you can tolerate. I don't know if I'm clear or...
And why Russia is not trying to replace US in Middle East?
That's, okay, what Russia does is very interesting. In the past, in East Europe, what they've done, for example, in the 50s and so on, they decided to send the tanks and have a military and direct control on the country. But this costs a lot. So what Putin said, they say, okay, we don't need to send military in today's world. We need to do two things: control the financial sector and the energy. Because if I close the gas and I close the banks, you die. I don't have to send any soldier. And Germany in 42 invaded Greece. Today they control the banks and the energy. They didn't send any soldier, but Greece has to do anything that Germany says. They cannot do anything else. So that's what Putin did by investing in different energy and banking assets in East Europe to control them, or sometimes close the gas through Ukraine. You know very well, better than me. But Russia, it's also a very weak and vulnerable power. Where they're very good is in the show-off. They appear to be a big power, but they're a weak power. But they're very good in doing that. So what do? They try to insert themselves everywhere they can to upset the Americans. Can be in Syria, can be in North Korea. You can see it in North Korea today. In North Korea, what happens? US puts pressure on China to close the trade, and Russia said, okay, you can trade with me now. Because now when they sit on the table with the Americans, the main problem is to kick them out of Ukraine and say, okay, there are a few things that we can discuss. We have Syria, we have North Korea, we have Venezuela. But what they want is the strategic one. The main problem is that in a negotiation, if you and I are fixed on the price of this bottle, it will be difficult. But if you have 4 or 5 things to discuss, I can give up on the other things, but I want this one. You see? And the Russians are very good in these things. Am I clear? Or? Done? Good. Anyway, I don't know if you want to leave my email address, my telephone number, if someone. By the way, you come from which departments here? Like business? How many from business? 1. International relations, political science? Okay. Law? No? Okay. Yeah, what else?
Okay, thank you very much, Mattia. Thank you, everyone for coming.